very synthesized version of what I give. It's I lecture at Columbia Business School and others on the topic of the future of real estate. I guess I'm, past the ripe old age of 60 years old, and people think I know what I'm doing, so I can get away with it. And so we're going to touch on how technology and other factors are affecting real estate. And as Marty alluded to, which is a perfect segue into my speech, is trying to think about things that are coming instead of what exists today is really how we've made money in the future. So I'm going to shed a little light on some of the things that I think are going to be happening in the future. And, hopefully we can all benefit from that. Marty, do you have it? Do you have this up there?
Yeah, I'm pulling up. I just have to start the slideshow. I'm going to pull it up. So, 1 second. And
hold on 1 second.
And 1, 2.
There we go.
There.
Okay, so that's us. You can go past that first page. So,
okay.
So what we're going to talk about is, as I mentioned before, kind of where I think things are going. What's going to affect that. We'll talk about the various asset classes, and then I'm going to focus in on industrial, which is a space that we're very active in right now. I think industrial is actually, of all the real estate asset classes, the one that's most impacted by technological change and will continue to be. It's early in its metamorphosis, and I think it's kind of emblematic of the kind of the convergence of real estate and technology. So we'll have an interesting discussion, and at the end, I'll have some closing thoughts. So Marty, you can go on.
Is it? Or am I going backwards?
Keep going. So I just want to give you 2 seconds about us. You can go back 1 slide to give you some sense of why I have any perspective on this. Wharton was a firm I founded over 35 years ago. We've invested a bunch of money. We've been pretty successful with gross IRRs in excess of 30% on realized transactions. We're partnered to major institutional investors, and we are actually very hands-on operators, so we're not allocators. And on the right are just glimpses of some of the things that we've developed or have in planning, spanning multifamily, self-storage, industrial, as I mentioned, hospitality. So we'll go from there. This is an important slide. It's kind of condensed. It's small here, but kind of the theme of this slide is that, and again, it's only when I look back on my career that I actually can say this, but we've actually been pretty good at predicting kind of where things are going. In '87, after I left Wall Street, started a real estate development firm. We were one of the early players in what's called lifestyle communities. So we were very focused on amenities. These were all for sale housing projects. We became one of the larger players in the tri-state area from zero. My parents, I went to Wharton undergrad, as Mark may have alluded to. My parents were a little in shock that I came out and was in jeans on construction sites yelling at supers. That my mother fainted over that, but they got over it. I built that business up, and we started migrating in 2000 to self-storage, which was still early in its existence. Self-storage is a relatively new business. It's hard to believe, but in 2000, it was extremely fractured. It's still fractured today, but there were very few institutional investors. And one of the reasons why there were limited institutional investors is that the size of the deals were too small. So my thesis was, if we can aggregate enough units, we might be able to sell these things. And that's what we were able to do. So we wound up starting by buying most of the self-storage from individuals out in the Hamptons. We controlled the market out there, and a company called Uncle Bob's, which is now Life Storage, wound up buying those properties from us. And then we migrated. We bought a whole portfolio from GE Capital around New York City, and we sold that to Northwestern Mutual. So we were one of the early guys in kind of making this more institutional asset class. From there, so we did that as we moved into the 2000s. 2005 and 6, we started getting nervous about credit, and we went out and raised a bunch of money from foreign investors to take advantage of what we saw was going to be some kind of crisis. Never could envision what happened in 2008 and 9, but we had a bunch of money. We closed on a fund, and we bought a whole bunch of things from Blackstone and others during that period. And somewhere around 2011-ish, I started thinking about, remember, this is a pretty dire time, 2009 and 10, for those who remember, it was not pleasant. But I started seeing little kind of green shoots coming out, and I felt that multifamily historically was the one that really leads us out of these downturns for obvious reasons. And we wound up starting to buy multi in the Southeast value add properties, What's today is that everyone's doing it, but back then cap rates were 7.5. Where in New York, let's say, was still, let's say, around 5.5, 6. But the interesting thing about that was that Freddie and Fannie, they basically their rates are the same whether you're investing in Greenville or in New York. And so we were making huge returns on our money. And we had a bunch of hedge funds that saw our vision in buying some of these secondary markets. We built that business up, and 2016, 17, we got 7,000 units. We started selling that off, and I'll tell you why. We also started in 2013 when there was 30,000 condo units down in Florida that were sitting. We started making investments in land in South Florida. We bought a big piece downtown with a group called Paulson that had just made a bunch of money, in the downturn. So they were sitting with some cash, and we went and bought some notes and got some properties, and we had a very good run in South Florida. Somewhere around 2016 or so, I started thinking about industrial, and what really triggered it was really started kind of seeing the impact of e-commerce and just starting putting two and two together that said, this is a trend that's not stopping. And one of the things I want to emphasize, and what I'm talking about today, is when we think about trends, I think about irreversible trends. I don't think about crypto. Crypto probably in some incarnation is going to be with us. And I'm not downplaying crypto, but I think about e-commerce. I think about the things that will never stop again. And by the way, it's only going to continue to accelerate as the new generations continue to come through. Many of these kids are born with cell phones in their cribs. So like we're still at the beginning. I think last year retail sales online was about 18% of all sales, and I think CBRE is now projecting by 2032. It's going to be over 33%. That's a pretty big jump. And think of it, we just passed last year $1 trillion of online sales. So we are still early in the game. When artificial intelligence, when you're going to be able to walk into Bloomingdale's online, they're going to be able to size you up with your clothes. You're going to be able to see what you look like. You're going to be able to buy it, and a few days later it'll be there. Like these are the things that are going to come. That's going to continue to spawn what I think is going to be just a continued boom in e-commerce. So for us, when we started looking at that trend, we basically said we got to go all in, and we did. We sold all our multifamily, probably prematurely. I'm guilty of that in many of the asset classes. We've made moves too early sometimes, but we put our money into industrial, and we've been pretty fortunate with the run. Marty, you can go to the next slide. Okay, let's go ahead from here. So one of the things that I really talk about, and I'm a big consumer of information, and it's not just what's the Fed's thinking today. I mean, that's all garbage. Really, what I think about is what are the really big changes ahead. And everyone's talking about what's happening with artificial intelligence. We're like way early in this whole conversation, but it's happening really fast. The next 3 to 5 years, I think over the next 10 years, without a doubt, will be the greatest period of discovery ever in the world. And what's going to happen here, which is really an incredible set of events, is AI is going to cross at some point in the next 5 to 7 years with quantum computing. And as I talk about here with quantum computing will be 158 million times faster than the fastest computers today. I mean, it's an incomprehensible number. But when you start thinking about those two worlds colliding, and then obviously we throw automation, driverless vehicles, and the other things I'm talking about here, we are in the doorsteps of things that we can't comprehend today. Matter of fact, one of the things I was thinking about is I probably should have taken my long lecture, had ChatGPT synthesize it for us, had a hologram sitting here giving the presentation so I could be sitting in the audience with you guys and ask myself tough questions at the end. All right? But it's crazy as it sounds, it's 5, 7, 10 years, but it's not 100 years from now. It's moving so quickly. So one of the driving forces, and I just touched on it briefly about the kids in the cribs, with their phones, is in 2008, which again, for guys my age, wasn't that long ago. And the amount of smartphones that were in the hands of the public was about 12% of the population. Today, it's, in 2008, it said 22%. Okay, I stand corrected, but we're over 90% almost now with people with smartphones. What that means is everyone has instant access to data. All right, now we're going to start throwing in AI and everything. So we are all, as a population, as a world. Now think about Starlink coming into play so people in remote locations can get access to the internet. We're going to be a world full of data. And the consumption of data is going to be the big business, in my opinion, going forward. And that's why data centers and things like that are going to continue to grow. But the implications on a world basis, and the other thing, I'm just shooting off of something on the side while I'm talking here, because I do that on occasion, is one of the things that really perplexes me, and I've talked to professors at Columbia and other places about this. I said, everyone's talking about, last recession happened like this, or historically in the last 5 recessions. And I'm sitting here saying, how could you talk about history when they didn't have artificial intelligence or information? We are in a world today where corrections are happening in nanoseconds. It's not like you're waking up in the morning and say, how did my GE stock do? Right? Like, that. So what does that mean? That means corrections are happening much faster. You're going to see steeper declines and faster rebounds. So we're moving into uncharted territory on the economic front as well. That's why when most of the guys talk on TV, I mute it, because it's all a lot of blabber that no one knows what the fuck they're talking about. Excuse my French. All right. So the things that we think about, again, is technology is a big one. Obviously, you can't disregard demographics. This is another thing it's obvious, right? People are getting older. The younger people are changing their habits. So how do you take advantage of that? One of the things, again, also that we should think about here is if you are focused, and Marty, you touched on this, which was really terrific, is if you're talking about looking at the obvious, which is today, your returns over time, because everyone's going to have access to the same information, over time returns are going to get to a certain level, and that's where they're going to moderate. So you're not going to be able to outperform. You're not going to be able to get entrepreneurial profits, in my opinion, by transparent information that everyone has access to.
So I'm going to tell you, the analogy you used 5 years ago was that you said it's like football. You don't pass the ball to where the guy is.
Right. That's
where it's going to be.
Right.
Well, it's a Gretzky.
Yeah. Analogy. Right.
The puck.
But so this is another reason why we think about where things are going, and because we want to try. Look, we live on baking. We get a percentage of the profits. That's our business model, and for us to get something that's just a moderate return is not satisfactory. And as evidenced by our RRRs over 35 years, in excess of 30%, we've been pretty good at doing this. Okay, Marty. So, as it relates to real estate, there are a number of changes that are going on, which I think warrant attention. We're gonna see, obviously, as I mentioned ad nauseum already, is the shift from brick and mortar to online. But let's not discount retail. Retail is still going to exist. Needs-based retail, entertainment-based retail, it's going to change, but people still are going to want to be, they still want to have that experience. And then obviously there's certain things you can't do online, maybe like going to the shoe guy and getting your heels fixed or whatever it may be. There'll be guys who come in and try to fix them for you. They'll come to your house, but I don't see that kind of stuff happening so fast. So obviously shopping centers, neighborhood shopping centers are going to continue to thrive. And I think buttressing that is also the fact you can't get these things approved. You want to build them anymore. So we have this rising class of kind of democratization of opposition in real estate. Today, you can put a Facebook page up and saying, let's all get together and go down to the town hall and fight this particular project, no matter what it is. And within an instant, they'll have 800 people attending meetings. That's going to start affecting the ability of developers to get things approved. And as you get more and more into infill locations, it's even worse. Universities are going to continue to be a hotbed of innovation. We're going to see more and more life evolve around universities. Obviously, engineering and I think biosciences are going to be a massive beneficiary of artificial intelligence. Probably, maybe the single most interesting area of discovery is going to be around drug discovery over the next 10 years. So we're also seeing already, I think, spurred by COVID, moving to secondary markets. I think you're going to see more and more of that. You're going to even see people moving to remoter locations. Boise's become a hotspot. Bozeman's become a hotspot. Those are becoming almost obvious now. Cheyenne, Wyoming is going to become a place. And what's going to happen is over time, and this dovetails into where technology comes to play, we're going to start seeing, I think, warehouses that are large warehouses located in central locations that are not prone to opposition, that where driverless trucks will go overnight to some of these secondary markets and feed or supply goods to those populations. And so we're going to see more and more of the emergence of these secondary markets And that'll have an effect on multi and, you know, and some other types of real estate. Obviously, as I mentioned briefly, we can't disregard the influence of millennials and seniors for different reasons. Seniors are living longer; they will live longer. So, an asset class that we really like, or kind of, it used to be 55 and older, now it's 65 and older. But the 65 to 85-year-olds are kind of in a weird spot where they're kind of being put into. They have been historically put into a category. Oh, you're going to throw them in an assisted living facility and, you know, let them live their life out. That's not what happens. You know, I think that the average age in assisted living is like 80 years old. I mean, you would not think it's the case, but most people who are healthy and active want to be in communities that really cater to that, wine tasting, all that kind of crap. So I think we're going to see more and more of these communities flourish. And like the Villages in Florida, if you guys know anything about it, it's a massive place and growing exponentially. And there's reasons for it. There's a lifestyle there. We're going to see more and more of the younger population not want to buy things. I think we're going to move into an era where they don't own anything. They're not going to own their houses. They're not going to own their cars. They're not going to own their wives. I mean, you know, they're going to rent out wives. I'm not sure that's happening so fast, but we are. So how do you take advantage of that? What does that mean? It means I think you're going to see a continued flourishing of single family rentals. You know, so like things that are happening today are only beginning to happen. And by the way, with like single family rentals, which is a space that we're really looking hard at, I think you're going to see more and more of robotics, 3D printing, manufacturing of products, not stick building on site, which will cut down costs and delivery times, because it's going to be very important to deliver product at a rent point that makes sense for people. This will be in combination with incentives that I think municipalities are going to start giving. So areas like the west coast of Florida, central Florida, Phoenix, Austin, these markets are going to continue to see, I think, a real big trend towards build to rent. Yeah.
Peter, just a quick question on the repurposing side. Do you see, one is local politics. Another thing is with respect to lenders, is they're going to sort of put feet to the fire to the landlords and the owners. Is repurposing going to be driven on an accelerated pace? Do you feel we're just seeing the beginning of it now? Because I mean, if you look around here in urban office, the concept of that going into residential is, you know, one of the big maybe saving trends, yeah. But you still have a lot of local opposition.
My gut feeling is that this is probably all fringe. I don't think it's a broad, overarching concept because of the restrictions. For example, high-rises in New York are very hard to convert. First of all, you need to have operable windows if you want to have a legal bedroom, for example, right? A lot of these buildings are not built with them. The other thing is they're very deep, so you can't get light. And so there's limitations, generally speaking. And then you really think about how many cities actually would you want to do that? And you're not going to do it in a city where you can live 5 minutes outside the city and you know, go back and forth. So I think that's an interesting play, big money, obviously, in it. I think there's going to be more and more. I love the idea of taking old warehouses like in the South and turning them into resi, wood floors, brick inside. People are going to be looking more and more for, I think, authentic. So that's kind of what I see. I don't see a big repurposing of malls. I think that's overblown. You might see it in the middle of the country, like Akron, where they're dying for anything, but you're not going to see it in Cherry Hill. You know what I mean? Like the people are going to come out there tomorrow and say, "There's no way you're going to have trucks driving in my, you know, my living room." And so I don't see now. What you might see in malls is more moving towards medical uses, some uses which are kind of complementary in some ways. They're not going to drive traffic necessarily, but they're going to fill space. But the bottom line is most malls are just too big, and they have to be thought of differently. You're going to need cooperation from the municipalities to rethink that, or they're going to be sitting with assets that are not generating any real estate taxes for them. Getting lenders, there's a bunch of private equity money out there. They'll do anything, you know, and they're smart enough to kind of know the difference between, let's say, Bank of America. You know what I mean? So there's so much money that entrepreneurial money will come into play and seep into those. It'll cost a little bit more, but you know, you're taking on more risk. You should have a higher upside to absorb that. But I do love the idea of, if I were to build stuff today, I'd really want those units to have something really interesting. You know, I love these living walls, for example. You know, just fun stuff. Don't do what everyone else does. That's the bottom line in how I think about life. They're going to see a broadening definition of real estate. Today, we're gyms. Lifetime Fitness is a brilliant brand. I'm not sure if you guys are following them. They're a fitness place, but now they have like a WeWork space. They have apartments, so it's all in one, one contained unit. And they're infusing it all with wellness. I think that's a really smart move. And again, getting back to authenticity, wellness is going to be a big topic in the coming years. So I think that's really fascinating. I think the merging of medical and real estate, walk-in clinics, all, it's continuing, veterinary, like all this stuff. Is it real estate? Is it an operating business? It's both. And more lenders are starting to recognize that they're lendable types of real estate, and akin to kind of like hotels. Crowdfunding is going to be an enormous force. I think in the future, it's big already. It's growing exponentially. There's going to be, I think, I see the day not that far off where a guy in Germany sitting in his living room is buying into a deal in Boise, or whatever. I mean, so you'll see more international money coming in. They'll figure out how to deal with the taxes and set up offshore entities. But firms like CrowdStreet and some of these other guys are big power. And we're big users and believers in them, and they're having to be terrific guys.
Got a little bit less than 10 minutes.
Okay. Let's just go through some of the asset classes I've touched on a little bit. I think office is a really interesting place. Again, I think that we're going to see more and more disruption in the cities of space that really has no reason for being. Side streets in the 30s in Manhattan with no light, they're dead. I think they're going to have to drop down to $20, $30 a foot to get any leasing. And it's not going to be feasible for guys to do that. So we're going to see a complete transformation of those buildings. They may stay as office, but they're going to have to come down in price. There's going to be the have and have-nots in New York, for example. West Side new buildings are going to continue to chew up space. I'm not really deterred in any way by the fact that Facebook laid off people and Charlie Brown laid off people. That's short-term nonsense. I think in the long term, that you're going to see more and more office come into play. It'll be woven into our lives in a different capacity, 3 days a week, 4 days a week, but it's not going to be 0 days a week for most people. All right. If you're an engineer, and you want to be sitting in the Colorado mountains, coding, that's one thing. But most companies want to see their people, and most people want to be together. So I think this dynamic is going to change. Also, obviously, it's going to change as unemployment kind of starts rising, and the leverage starts changing. Interestingly, I'm going to just go quickly to something. In warehouses today, you're seeing more and more of a push in many of them to unionization. And what's ironic about that is in some manner, what they're doing is they're forcing firms like Amazon to move more to robotics. So in some way, what's going to happen here is they're going to expedite the removal of these jobs, ironically. So this whole shifting of worker and employer is going to come into play in various forms as we move forward. Retail I talked about, needs-based entertainment. So Marty, go on to the next. Love residential. I still think it's fantastic. I love infill locations. Affordable, it's a big issue, but I think it's going to be solvable in the future to some extent. Lifestyle markets, as I mentioned before, are going to continue to flourish. What's interesting, I think all of last year, the top rental growth markets in the country were Cincinnati, Columbus, places that everyone's supposed to be fleeing. I think the reason for that is actually not exactly accurate in the press, is that everything else has grown so fast, those guys were left behind. That even a small jump, is like a big jump in those markets. I'm not advocating to own in Columbus, Ohio, but I thought it was kind of interesting to see the rent growth in those markets. But long term, it's still going to be the smile of the country that's going to see the growth. And I talked about senior housing, so we can go past that. Hotels, happen to be a real big fan of hotels. Lifestyle hotels, more towards less towards conference center hotels because that space is a waste now. You're going to see more and more. If companies are going to have meetings, they're going to do it in exotic locations or places where the families can come, the kids can play while the father's working. I don't see. So then the question is going to be, what do you do with these big hotels that have a lot of conference room space? It's not easy to turn that into rooms, and sometimes you don't want to put more rooms in that market. So what do you do with it? How do you activate it? That's something that a lot of guys are thinking about as we go forward. But again, I think the leisure play. I love. We had a hotel near Telluride that was fantastic. Through COVID, it was booming. People were driving through there, and the best seasons were summer. And the reason is they were driving, they were lifestyle, they were out hunting, they were taking the kids, on the rivers. And I think we're going to see more and more of that as families stay in the U.S. and travel and go to locations which are fun locations. I will point out something you may have read about that. Barry Sternlick has announced a new brand. And he's going to be going after the kind of the camping set, the RV set. It's a brilliant play, absolutely fantastic. And Field and Stream, I think is the name of the brand off the magazine. And it's going to be moderate priced, located in locations near some of the parks. And that's just playing into the world that's ahead of us, which is going to be more about thinking about traveling domestically and being with our families. And then the last thing here is this is another category, cold storage, production studios, data centers. All these things are going to continue. Self-storage will continue. My concern about self-storage generally is that you really want to be careful about markets that have a lot of land, because you could spray paint up self-storage facilities. So you want to be supply constrained markets that are growing. That's the perfect match. If you can find those, that's fantastic. I love RV and mobile home parks. Again, lifestyle changes that are going. You're going to see more and more young people jumping into RVs. It's not just going to be the old geezers you got to watch out on the road. It's going to be young people who you have to watch out on the road. And then we're going to see vertical farming come into play over time. By the way, you could see that in New York City. Interestingly enough, in Japan and other places, they have high rises that are pig farming, vertical farming. That's going to be something that could be potentially an interesting play in the future. Marty, next. Good. I'll move fast here.
We're running out of time. Yep,
there's a lot of stuff here, but a lot of good things are going on in the world right now. The biggest of them, onshoring is not something that's just a word. More and more manufacturing is coming back to the United States, light assembly. Mexico is going to play a bigger role. So you're going to see a lot of warehouses coming on the southern border of our country. And so it is where you used to think about warehouses is these old cruddy buildings sitting in ports on, like in Philadelphia. Their dynamics have changed. Obviously, e-commerce has completely changed the game with million square foot bombers. That's 23 football fields of under one roof, if you think about 1 million feet. And we're going to see more and more buildings that are going to be fit for today's world. I would call it the digital world. So they're going to be highly automated. They're going to require a lot of power. They're going to have solar on their roofs. They're probably going to be more moderate roof sizes. So let's say 28 to 32 high instead of 36 and 40. If you look at an area like Mesa, Arizona, where we're building 1.5 million square feet right now in an industrial park, the companies that surround this, that feed off this ecosystem there, so Boeing, electric vehicles, social media, all these companies are kind of congregating in markets like Austin, Phoenix, and these are going to be the new hotbeds, in my opinion, for industrial growth and obviously residential. Go ahead, Marty. Again, just talking about some things. We've always loved, and we continue to buy last mile properties. It's an overused word, but basically these are properties that are located next to really big populations, as close as possible to the population, so that people can get goods, companies can get goods into the population as quickly as possible. That's going to continue to be a big issue. And you can't build in those markets. So we have a huge holding down in Philly. It's a 1% vacancy in that market. Rates are running. Even today's world, it's still impossible to find anything available down there. Bulk distribution, which is warehouses, are going to continue to get bigger. They're going to move to more remote locations. Amazon's got 5-story buildings now that are 4 million feet, 3 million feet, fully robotics, except for the first floor. Really interesting buildings. Flex, I just talked about. Healthcare is going to be big, as you guys can imagine. Micro fulfillment. So reverse logistics is a huge business. 1/3 of all goods are returned. What do you do with it? Where does it go? There's a whole world around that. Artificial intelligence is coming into play. They're kind of figuring out where to build these logistics warehouses. Okay, Marty, go ahead. We don't really have to talk about us much further. We've done a lot over the last number of years. We were fortunate. We got a good timing. We got about 11 million feet right now, either under development or we have acquired that since 2017. And we've been pretty successful in realizing the execution on a number of transactions. Timing helps. We can anticipate COVID. But again, it goes back to the fact that I don't really think about like these outlier events. And I don't really, whether they're good or bad, I think about that trends that are going to push their way through all this. And you know, again, we've been pretty fortunate to be in this position. Okay, Marty. I'll go really fast here because I know we're down to the wire here. This is an interesting property that we bought in Philadelphia, which was a subway repair facility, about 300,000 feet. And it was a really ugly building. Like everyone in the local market passed on it. But what we loved about it was it's sitting at the intersection. That's I think 76 underneath it, and 95. They intersect right there. We have the Port of Philadelphia is 3 minutes away. The airport's 3 minutes away. And when I looked at this building and I walked through it, really like there's birds pooping on top of you. The windows were broken. I mean, it was a horror show. I said, we're buying this thing. The broker like almost fell on the floor. He said, look at some naive New Yorker coming to town. But I knew it was a last mile facility. And we wound up going in there. I convinced an equity partner to come in. I convinced a lender to come in, a private lender, because there's no comps on this thing. And we wound up putting a bunch of money into it. We bought it for almost 17 million. We put 10 million into it. And we were fortunate Amazon came along, took the whole building, and we sold it for $71 million within a year and 15 months.
Next South Philadelphia or next to
South Philly.
Yeah.
Wow. A war zone. You wouldn't, you know,
Sure
the local
is.
guys wouldn't go there.
Yep.
They thought I was nuts. I loved it. When I sold it, I sent them a little note. Right across the river on the other side, also down there's an area called Pensauken, which is right over the bridge. It's 15 minutes from the city. We wound up buying a 1.3 million square foot park from a family who had built this, and they've owned it for 40 years. If there's an aerial here, you would see how densely populated. 6 million people around this property, and we were fortunate. We actually went hard on this deal. In other words, our deposit went hard in the middle of COVID, and I had to convince my partner Wharton Street to go forward with us. And we were fortunate. We paid, I think, like roughly $80 a foot. In a world today, even today, it's probably worth around 140 a foot, and that was 2 years ago. All right, let's keep going. You skip one, but that's okay. Go back one, just one more. Go back one. No, there. Oh, that one. That's the project we're building in Mesa, Arizona. I think it's 11 buildings. I forget exactly the number. Smaller buildings. And the bottom pictures were in the construction there. I was actually there, as I mentioned yesterday. Really exciting project and a really interesting market. Okay, next.
I just noticed as a common thought that these are either in high growth areas or in areas that are kind of ignored. I mean, Philadelphia as a center of commerce is kind of ignored, but there's all kinds of opportunities to make
people.
radical changes.
And these
right?
people are buying stuff online. I mean,
Right.
you know, they're like anyone else.
Like the center that you had, even though nobody in Philadelphia would touch it, it's definitely an institutional center where Amazon could just come in and say, "Oh, this is institutional."
I mean, you know, we got luck. I mean, I don't know if it was luck, but shit, to get Amazon to come in, it was you know, a dream, right?
Ceiling heights to look at.
Excuse me?
What type of ceiling heights do you usually look at?
That building had 30 feet. That was unusual. You're usually getting 18 feet in kind of like really like those urban areas. You don't want to be lower than that if you can get away with it. This is a spec development we did outside of Atlanta. That was almost 1 million feet. We did that with Starwood, and we during construction, Phil's then uses, which is Tommy Hilfiger and Calvin Klein, came and leased the whole building. And that was, we wound up selling that.
Is that near Buckhead or the other side of Buckhead?
So it's southwest.
Okay.
So that's my 20-minute spiel. That would normally be 2 hours. So if there's any questions or anything you'd like to ask me, I'm happy.
Okay, we have time for 2 questions.
To what extent is water a consideration in your investment?
It's becoming bigger and bigger. Yeah, and that's why vertical farming is interesting, because you can recycle 80% of the water. So you're going to see the water, particularly out west, is becoming a consideration. You got to look at that. Yeah, it's a big issue. I mean, everything's an issue. Think about California now, where they're going to start putting rent controls on everything. I mean, if you're an investor in these markets and rents are booming, and you're all excited to go in there, and then one day they just say, "I'm sorry, 3% a year." I mean, it kills you. So political risk, environmental risk are big issues going forward.
I think Arizona just signed a contract with an Israeli company to build a water conversion plant, desalination plant out in Mexico to pipe it in to Phoenix.
It's a good question, though.
But,
Office building to residential conversion, wishful thinking or real opportunity?
Wishful thinking, mostly. You know,
In New York, around the country. I know New York has DOB restrictions.
right? I think it could pop up in certain markets, but then you got to start looking at how much does it cost to retrofit it and what does it cost to build new. You know, and so either way, it's kind of a bastardized product. So it has to be small floor plates.
Last one, hotel conversion to micro apartments. Any thoughts? I know some guys are jumping in a big way, but
You know, I don't know. I mean, again, I think you can build that stuff pretty cheap. Unless you're stealing it, why bother? Or it's a place you just can't get zoning anymore, right?
any more questions? Got time for one more fast answers. No,
I was going to ask myself a question.
What was water treatment in studies? Do you have water treatment convert wastewater into clean water?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the question.
Wastewater into clean water.
Converting wastewater to clean water?
No,
That's not realistic.
that's not. I mean, it will be, but I'm not really not involved in that right now.
Anything else? I got time for one last question. Okay, guys. John. I know always knew John would have.
So I was approached on a project which is I think ongoing, where retirement homes are being built, or condos, retirement rentals, whatever, on campuses, where life is much better than looking at all the old people in Miami Beach.
Fantastic business. So interesting. I think it's a really bright spot. What you're going to see more and more, Arizona State's done this and some others, where we're going to see 65-year-olds living and being able to take classes.
Correct.
And be part of the opera there and everything else. It is a brilliant.
Universities as lifetime communities.
Love that place.
Yeah, absolutely.
Really,
Universities get maybe adjunct professors.
Fantastic. It's
And
a
they
great
get
business.
money
Yeah,
and
I mean, you got to
they
be careful. It's got to
down.
be real universities with healthcare systems. It can't be someplace in the middle of nowhere because those universities are going to go bye-bye soon.